Hey, what's up, guys? This is Benny Ricciardi with rotocurve.com, and I'm here with our DraftKings Benny's Bats video for, we got Wednesday, June 15th. 10-game slate of games going on tonight at 7 o'clock, so we're going to be talking about the late slate. There are some afternoon games as well. There's a game at Coors Field. Clayton Kershaw and Johnny Cueto are both on the mound today, so it's a tough slate in the early going. You got to really make some decisions on who you want to pay up for and where you want to spend your money. But we're going to concentrate on the late, on the late slate for tonight. We got the first game that we got up here is going to be Toronto against Philadelphia. Marco Estrada is on the mound for Toronto, and he's been really good this year. About a 2.50 ERA, a WHIP of only 1. Not a huge strikeout guy, so I don't know if he's somebody that I'm going to be using on the mound. But right and left-handed bats are hitting less than 220 against him. He's going up against a bad offense in Philly. I'm not really looking to use anybody on this Philly team. You know, Estrada's a little bit pricey on DraftKings, tad cheaper over on FanDuel. I think he is in line for the win. I think this could be a decent start for him, but I don't think I'm going to be using him or any bats against him today because I just don't see anything that says a lot of upside here. On the other side of that game, Jeremy Hellickson is pitching for the Phillies, and left-handed bats are usually the way you want to go against him. He's been tough on righties. His last 2 starts have not been good at all. He's been getting knocked around by everybody. I don't really love this Jays team today. You know, Michael Saunders is the only one that kind of profiles well against them as a left-handed bat. I think the way you want to do it, if you're going to use the Jays, I think you stack them up in the tournament, hoping that Hellickson is as bad as he was in the last 2 starts. I mean, I don't think he's as good as he showed us at the beginning of the year, but I don't think he's as bad as he was in the last 2 starts either. So if I'm doing anything here, I'm probably stacking up the Jays. And if you're stacking them up, you're taking the big bats, the Donaldsons, the Batistas, the Encarnaciones, probably a guy like Michael Saunders, especially if he's hitting cleanup. Maybe a Justin Smoke, another lefty who can hit right-handed pitching pretty well. Hellickson struggles with those lefties, so that would be the way I attack that game. The next game we can talk about, Baltimore at Boston. Stephen Wright, the knuckleballer, is on the mound for Boston. And, I mean, he's been great this year. Both right and left-handed bats are only hitting about 200 against them. He threw a complete game 4-hitter with 2 earned runs the last time he faced Baltimore about 2 or 3 weeks ago, I think. The only guy I'm looking at on Baltimore is Manny Machado. You look at BVP with the knuckleballers, and the only comparable that we really have for Wright is R.A. Dickey. Machado was 7 of 19 against Dickey with a couple doubles, I think 3 or 4 extra base hits. So he's really the only one who hits the knuckleball well on this Baltimore team. So if I'm using anybody on Baltimore, it's going to be Machado, but I don't mind Wright either because, like I said, he had a good game against them last time. He's a knuckleballer, so he can throw 120 pitches in a game with with pretty much ease. So he is a guy that can get you a complete game and all that stuff. I don't know if I love him today, but I think Wright would probably be the way to go there. On the other side, we got Kevin Gausman, and Gausman's kind of a reverse splits guy. Right-handed bats, he's a right-handed pitcher. Right-handed bats hit about 280 against them the last 2 years, and he's given up 8 home runs in 35 innings in 2016. So he is getting knocked around a little bit by some of these righties. Remember, Mookie Betts had his 2 home run game off of Gausman earlier this year, so I think Betts is somebody you can look at. Pedroia is 5 of 14 against them. I don't hate Xander Bogaerts as a shortstop option. And then even David Ortiz, I know he's a lefty, but he's a guy who has mashed right-handed pitching his entire career. 430 WOBA, 300 ISO score, 7 of 16 lifetime with 2 home runs against Gausman. So if you're going to use Boston, I think you take the right-handed bats at the top of the order along with Ortiz, like the top 4 guys there. I think there's a lot of upside with doing that. I do think that Boston put some runs up against Gausman today. Next game we can talk about Cincinnati against Atlanta. Anthony DeSclafani is on the mound for Cincinnati. This is the second start he's making since, coming off the DL. Now, people are saying he had a good start the first time out. He went 6 innings, only gave up 1 run, but he gave up like 9 hits and 4 walks. Every inning, there were 2 or 3 guys stranded on base. So, he got very lucky in that start. I could definitely see him getting knocked around a little bit today. Although this Atlanta team isn't really a great offense, but they do have a lot of left-handed bats that profile well against DeSclafani. If you're getting Malik Smith up leading off on top of that order, he's a guy that I like. 380 WOBA, 206 ISO against right-handed pitching. Has that stolen base upside to go along with it as well. Could score some runs. So, Malik Smith still pretty cheap on a lot of sites. I think if he's leading off, he's a guy that's in play. I also think you can look at Freddie Freeman, 367 WOBA, 215 ISO, I think, against right-handed pitching. So he's another guy that I think you can put in there. If you want to look at the lefties profile well against DeSclafani. Guys like Inciarte, guys like Nick Markakis, maybe even an AJ Pierzynski. I do think that Atlanta can score a couple runs here, although it's Atlanta. I'm not really looking for them to go crazy. Probably would just use guys like maybe Smith or Freeman as one-offs. On the other side of this game, Bud Norris threw a gem last game against the Cubs and has been pretty good since they made him a starter. But, he's Bud Norris. This is a guy that we've seen pitch for a couple years right now. The last 2 years, he's given up 13 home runs and 58 innings pitched to left-handed bats. Left-handers have a higher average against them the last 3 seasons. Maybe a Joey Votto makes some sense here. 5 of 14 lifetime with a home run against Norris. 407 WOBA, a 235 ISO for him. A guy like Jay Bruce with a big 258 ISO has some home run power. So those would be the guys that I'd look at to go up against Norris. Next game, we can talk about Pittsburgh against the New York Mets. Noah Syndergaard on the mound for the Mets. Nasty. 2 ERA this year, 1 for his whip, 95 strikeouts, 77 innings. If you're going to do anything against him, you want left-handed bats. So maybe a guy like Jaso, a guy like Polanco. But, do you really want to take bats against Noah Syndergaard? I like Syndergaard. I think he's in a good spot here. I think he'll give us a really good start, and I'm not really looking at any of the bats on Pittsburgh. The other side of that game, you got Jeff Locke. Right-handed bats usually the way you want to go after the lefty Locke. This Mets team is pretty bad. This offense is just struggling right now. They almost got no hit by, Jameson Taillon making his second major league start last night. Again, the kid is pretty good, but still, it says a lot about this offense as well. The one guy who is hitting is Yoenis Cespedes. Multiple hits in 4 of his last 5 games, so he's about the only guy that I would be looking at on this Mets team. And, not really looking to take anybody else in this team right now. They're really struggling. The only other guy who hits lefties well is David Wright, who's kind of out of the game. Maybe a Wilmer Flores if you want to reach a little bit. But, I think Locke could even be a sneaky play here today because the Mets have been that bad. Next game we can talk about, we got Seattle at Tampa Bay. I really like Nate Carnes here. He's got strikeout upside. He's averaging over 9 Ks per 9 innings. And this Tampa Bay team strikes out a lot against right-handed pitching. There's really nobody on this team that profiles well. Corey Dickerson is their big left-handed bat, and I'm not a big fan of him. Steve Pearce has been hot lately, so he could be somebody you can look at. But, I'm not really looking to pick on Carnes here. I don't think there's a lot of upside in doing so. On the other side of this game, Drew Smyly has not been good lately. He's given up a home run in 6 of his last 8 games. In 5 of those 6 games, he's given up multiple home runs, at least 2 or more. So the one guy who I love here is Nelson Cruz. Cruz absolutely mashes left-handed pitching, over a 400 WOBA, high 200 ISO score. He's a guy that has hit left-handed pitching well his entire career. I know it's not a great home run park in Tampa Bay, but I do think Nelson Cruz is in a really good spot. If you're looking for a catcher option, Chris Iannetta hits lefties well. So he could be somebody in play. And then Franklin Gutierrez is another guy who does well against left-handed pitching. So there are a couple guys in the Seattle team I think you can look at, especially with Drew Smyly struggling right now. Next game we can look at is Houston against St. Louis. Adam Wainwright's on the mound, and Wainwright's had 2 really good starts in a row. 4 of his last 5 have been quality starts, so he is rounding back into form a little bit. Houston is a high strikeout team, so I think there is a good floor here for Wainwright as well. At the same point in time, we've also seen him get lit up, and this Houston team is basically feast or famine. If Wainwright doesn't have his good stuff today, you could definitely see a couple home runs getting hit and Houston putting up a big number. If, Houston is just swinging wildly and missing and Wainwright does have the stuff that he's had the last 2 games, he could be somebody that could put up a big number. So I think it's mostly a tournament play here, and I think both sides of it could be a tournament play. I think you can take Wainwright in some tournament teams, and I think you can stack up Houston in some tournament teams. I don't think there's enough safety on either side of this game to use any of those guys in cash. On the other side, against Colin McHugh, I do think we can take some bats against McHugh. Left-handed bats have a high average against him, somewhere in the 270, 280 range the last couple of years. He has given up a couple home run balls, but he's not like a huge home run pitcher. I do think a guy like Matt Carpenter's in a great spot, 404 WOBA, 266 ISO score for him, leading off on top of that order. Should be able to put up a good line today, probably get 4 at-bats there. And then you can look at guys like Brandon Moss hitting the 2-hole yesterday. So if he's going to hit in the 2-hole, another big lefty bat on top of the order, I think he makes some sense. Matt Adams hit another home run for us yesterday. In the last 8 games, Matt Adams has been averaging over 10 DraftKings points per game. So for the price that they're asking for him, I think he's another viable option. I like the lefties against McHugh. That's probably the way I'd attack them and the guys that I'd go with. Next game we can talk about, we got Detroit going up against the Chicago White Sox. Chris Sale is on the mound. And I mean, Chris Sale's a very good pitcher, but this Detroit team also hits left-handed pitching pretty well. J.D. Martinez especially, 7-24 against Sale, 2 home runs, 377 WOBA, 260 ISO against left-handed pitching. And, there's 5 or 6 other guys that hit lefties well. So I don't think I want to use Sale today because I do think Detroit will get a couple runs. But I also think that Sale's going to make it tough on them. So other than J.D. Martinez, I don't like any of the bats in this game. And even J.D. Martinez would only be somebody that I threw into a tournament roster that I wasn't using Sale on. To kind of give myself a little bit of differentiation. But to be honest, I'm perfectly okay not using Sale and not using any of the Detroit bats and just kind of staying away from that side of the game. Now, on the other side of this game, you got Mike Pelfrey on the mound. Both righties and lefties are hitting about 300 against him over the last 2 seasons. He does get a ton of ground balls, though, and doesn't give up a lot of home runs. So I'm not expecting huge upside for anybody on this, on this Chicago White Sox team. I do want to point a couple guys out, though. Jose Abreu's been on fire, so I think he's someone you can use. 364 WOBA, 217 ISO score, 4 of 11 lifetime against Pelfrey. Like I said, he could get you a couple hits there. I really like Tim Anderson, the shortstop. They just sent down or basically designated Jimmy Rollins for assignment so that they could bring Anderson up from AAA and kind of give him at-bats. And they stuck him right in there leading off at the top of the order. So he's like minimum price on FanDuel and DraftKings today. So I think Tim Anderson is definitely going to be one of the salary-saving options that a lot of people use. Had a big game last night, had a couple hits, scored a couple runs, put up a good number. And at minimum price, he's a great cash game kind of guy to use in order to save some money to be able to pay up at pitching. Adam Eaton, also another guy that makes a little bit of sense. 4-10 lifetime against Pelfrey, 355 WOBA for him. So he's another guy that hits right-handed pitching well. I could see you using Abreu, Anderson, and Eaton up towards the top of the order. I would not be opposed to anybody doing that. Next game we can talk about, we got Cleveland against KC. Corey Kluber's on the mound. Very tough on right-handed bats. Left-handed bats do okay against them, but he's still pretty tough on them too. He's got an ERA of about 3.6, a whip right around 1, about a strikeout per inning. So he's a solid pitcher. This Kansas City team always scares me. I mean, even though they got all these injuries and this lineup is going to be a little bit weaker against Kluber. They're a team that's just very professional hitters. Even the guys that they're putting in there and bringing up, they're not making it an easy time on pitchers. They take pitches. They don't let guys get deep into the game. So kind of gives me a little bit of pause on Kluber, although I'm not really using any of those bats. I mean, Eric Hosmer's been probably the best bat they have against right-handed pitching, but he doesn't have good BVP against Kluber. He hasn't done well against them. So I think I'm staying away from all the bats here, and I don't know if I'm going to be using Kluber either. On the other side of this game, Ian Kennedy, high home run rate for him to both left and right-handed bats. And there are a couple guys on the Indians that have hit him well. You can look at guys like Santana and Napoli if you're looking for a home run, but they do not have good stats against Kennedy so far in their careers. The guys who do, Rajai Davis is 5 for 10. Chisenhall and Lindor are both 4 for 6. So those would probably be the guys that I'm looking at. You got some decent numbers there that I think you can exploit if you wanted to. I think it's a sneaky tournament stack. I wouldn't mind having some of these Cleveland bats in my lineup. I'm not a big fan of Kennedy. I don't think he's a very good pitcher. Next game we have is Minnesota against the LA Angels. Tyler Duffy on the mound. The last 4 games, he's given up 9 hits and 5 runs in each one of those games without getting out of the 5th inning. So, I guess you can look at bats over here, although I don't really like the bats on the Angels. Mike Trout obviously stands out as the best one, 414 WOBA, 285 ISO for him. Jeffrey Marte's been a guy that's been hitting well lately, so he's somebody else that I think you can use. If you want to look at like a Cole Calhoun or an Albert Pujols, Escobar. None of these guys are really exciting, but I guess if you're stacking up the Angels, which, could be a thing to do because Duffy's not a very good pitcher, I guess those would be some of the guys that you'd include in that stack. Although I think it's still only a tournament kind of play, outside of Trout and maybe Marte as a salary saver and cash. On the other side of this game, Hector Santiago has not been good either. he's been getting shelled lately, giving up more hits, more walks, and more home runs in his recent starts. There's not really anybody who stands out on Minnesota. Probably my favorite two plays. Eduardo Nunez has been very good leading off for them. Fills a tough to fill shortstop position for you. 280 ISO for him, 348 WOBA. He's somebody that's been okay. Robbie Grossman has been hitting really well out of the 3-hole for them lately. 367 WOBA, 184 ISO for him. You got some of those other guys that are big right-handed bats with a little bit of power upside. Guys like Trevor Plouffe, guys like Brian Dozier, maybe even like a Young-Ho Park. These guys do have the ability to jack a ball out of the yard, and Santiago has been known to give up a lot of home runs, so it makes a lot of sense if you want to look at some of those guys. I don't think either one of these pitchers is all that good. I think we see a lot of runs in these games, but it's not really a game that kind of jumps out at me as, having a lot of guys that I'm going to be having on my cash game teams. The next game we can talk about, the last one on the day, is Texas going up against Oakland. Sonny Gray making his second start after coming back, and he's looked very good since he came off the DL. It is a tough matchup for him, though. Left-handed bats tend to do a little bit better. He's not a high strikeout guy, so I don't expect a big number out of Gray today. You can look at guys like Sin-Soo Choo, who also just came off the DL. I really like Nomar Mazara, another good left-handed bat. Both of them have like 390 WOBAs and 210 ISO scores. Maybe you can even go down to like an Odor or a Fielder, although, Gray had looked like his old self in that last start. So a guy that's going to limit the hits, limit the walks, limit the runs, but he's not going to get a ton of strikeouts for you. So I don't really love Gray. I think if I did anything, it would be Rangers bats. But again, it's really more of like a tournament play. It's not something I think is safe for cash. On the other side of this game, though, Derek Holland, a guy that, right-handed bats have a higher average and more home runs against. I really like Danny Valencia, 400 WOBA for him, 200 ISO, hits left-handed pitching very well. Marcus Semien, the shortstop option, another guy that hits left-handed pitching well, 380 WOBA and 207 ISO score for him, so the numbers are good as well. And then Chris Davis is another right-handed bat. He's been hot lately, driving in a lot of runs from the middle of that order. Another right-handed bat that has a good power stroke against left-handed pitching. He's not much of an average guy, but he does have the chance to jack one out, and he should get up with some guys on base and have a chance to knock in some runs. So, Chris Davis been pretty hot lately. He's another guy that I'd look at. And that basically sums it up. Like I said, we had a 10-game slate on tap today for MLB DFS. Some good pitching options, a couple guys that are gas cans, a couple guys that are good pitchers going up against good offenses that, we kind of want to stay away from both sides of. So I don't think it's a very tough slate to get at. I think it's, one that's kind of straightforward. But with the 10-game slate, you're going to have ownership all over the place. So just stick to your favorite plays, and you should be able to make some money tonight. Thank you guys for joining us here at rotocurve.com. And as always, stay classy, DFS.